So I went with an entertainment guy jersey today rather than football. So I went with my brand new, just got this. This is from Geeky Jerseys, of course, if I'm wearing a movie, TV, music themed kind of jersey, whatever it is. It's from Geeky Jerseys, and they don't pay me to say it. It's just people always ask. So power rankings this week. Number 1 and number 32 should be obvious. Everywhere in between, there's some debate. And the thing is, 2 weeks into the season, we really don't know a lot yet. There are plenty of teams who've started 0-2 and moved their way up. Teams that have started 2-0 and dropped quickly. And so we'll get into where teams are. I'll also mention where teams are playing next. So number 32, surprise, surprise, it's Miami. They've been outscored 102-10. They're putting up 192 yards per game so far this year. That's sad. That's a really sad total. And what's even sadder is this week they're going to Dallas. So the chances of Miami turning things around are what's 0 divided by 0 times, you guys get it. Number 30, moving down one spot from last week. They're 0-1-1. They've been outscored 50-44 thus far this season. They've put up 368 yards per game. Might be a sleeper. You just never know. The Cardinals could end up being that. They're at home against Carolina. So if we're looking at a team on this board that I didn't move up, they lost. They're winless, but they're against another winless team this coming week. Arizona could potentially move up the board just a little bit next week. We'll see. We'll see if they can come through. And there's some good news if you're a Cardinals fan today, and we'll get into that when I get up to that part of the countdown. Number 30, dropping one spot from last week. They've been outscored 63-31 so far this year. And Jones is now going to be their starting quarterback, apparently. So the rumors that Eli Manning might be the backup, they're true. They're at Tampa Bay. So if the New York Giants are going to turn things around at all, and I know I could pause for laughter, but if they're going to turn things around at all, it has to start this week. So if they're going to stop the bleeding, if the New York Giants are going to make themselves relevant, it has to start this week. If they drop to 0-3 and they lose at Tampa, then their season is kind of playing itself out from there. Again, 0-3 isn't a horrible start that you can't come back from, but it's tough. 0-2, but once you get to 0-3, and then 0-4, of course, there are those miraculous teams that recover from 0-4, but they're rare. Number 29, also dropping one spot from last week, also 0-2. All of these teams haven't won a game yet, so it makes it hard for me to bump them up or do anything else with them. Outscored 63-48 so far this year. Washington has an interesting matchup this week. And they're putting up 326.5 yards per game. The Giants are putting up 420 yards per game. I thought I'd throw that on the board. I'll do different numbers every week. So Washington, the position they find themselves in is interesting because this coming week they're at home against Chicago. I look at that and I think, you know what? If Washington's going to earn a win, it might come there. It may very well come there. We'll see. Chicago had a pretty good week this week. We'll see if Washington can slow them down. But it's going to come down to whether or not their offense can break through Chicago's defense, really. And that's standard with all football. You got to score more points than the other guy. It's the same thing I say on the Hockey Channel. Hey, I think the team that scores more goals is probably going to win. It's brilliant. Number 28, dropping 3 spots from where they were last week. They're 0-2. And now they're going to Green Bay. They've been outscored 40-30 this year. And they're putting up 358 yards per game. And it's Denver. The Broncos, the once proud Denver Broncos, being down this low in the power rankings is weird to me. It's really, really bizarre, and I wouldn't have thought that was possible. That being said, here we are. The Denver Broncos are number 28. Strange. Number 27, also dropping 3 spots from where they were last week. There's a lot of dropping going on here. Denver's going to Green Bay and could drop even further this week. I could see them below Washington. I could definitely see the New York Giants below Arizona. I could see the Cardinals actually moving up past all these teams, and maybe moving past this one too. The Bengals have allowed 62. They've scored 37. They're putting up 372.5 yards per game. Dalton seems to be putting up good numbers, but the team around him. And they're at Buffalo this week. So if Cincinnati's going to right this ship at all and have a shot at doing something, and it feels like this division, there might be room to finish second. There might be room to maybe get a shot at a wild card. The trick, of course, is I don't know that the Baltimore's going to end up being catchable. We're already at that stage where I look after 2 weeks and I go, well, Baltimore looks like the best team in the division. And Cincinnati and Pittsburgh look kind of miserable, and it doesn't look like things are going to necessarily get any better. The good news is for Cincinnati, they have their quarterback. So if they're going to make hay, if they're going to show that they still have any kind of upward momentum, they were a playoff team not that long ago. They kind of have to show it this week. So for them going to Buffalo, that's going to be an interesting matchup because I think while Buffalo's got off to that good start, I don't know how much of that is sustainable. Number 26, dropping 5 spots from last week. They're 0-2. They've been outscored 40-19, and they're down to their number 3 quarterback. Yeah, you guys know who I'm talking about. So they put in the backup because their number 1 quarterback gets mono. Weird when adults get mono, isn't it? And it's not just like, I know the reputation mono has, but the way that you catch it, it's not the way people say. 242.5 yards per game. So they're down to their number 3 quarterback, and they're already not generating enough yards. And now the New York Jets get to go to New England, to which Jets fans will be overjoyed, I'm sure. It's a rough time to be a fan of either of the New York football teams right now. Neither of them are particularly great. And it's weird because I remember before last season started, I said, well, the Jets are supposed to be good, but they're the Jets. And I took some flack for that. And I was like, but they're the Jets. So this is just kind of how it works. I will say this. I like the black jerseys they were wearing yesterday. Sure. Number 25. A team moving up. A team moving up 1 spot even though they've lost 2 games. Because they probably should have won the game on Sunday. Or at least tied it. You know what I'm talking about. They've been outscored 53-38. They're putting up 354.5 yards per game. And next week they're at home against Tennessee. So Jacksonville's in that situation as well. These teams are in that situation where it's okay. It's an 0-2 start, or in Arizona's case, an 0-1-1 start. We want to really, get this thing going and get it all together. This is the week. Week 3 is the week. For them, they're against Tennessee. If they can beat Tennessee, then both teams will be 1-2. If they lose, they drop to 0-3, and Tennessee jumps to 2-1. So for Jacksonville, this is kind of the time. So the whole Jalen Ramsey thing, it's at the worst possible time if you think Jacksonville has a chance. If you don't, then okay. And I again, with football being football and with every week being so monumentally important, there will be plenty of fans who look at their team in this row and say, season's still young, there's lots of time. Then there's Miami fans who will say, all right. Number 24, so getting into the next row, these guys drop 8 spots. Yeah, 8. They're 0-2, and teams that are 0-2, I didn't want to keep them up in this area. I looked at that and I said, nah, we're not doing that. So 0-2, dropping 8 spots. They're going to San Francisco this week. They've been outscored 61-29. And without Ben Roethlisberger, we'll see if that makes things better. I have a funny feeling it might. Rudolph looked pretty good. So, for the Steelers, this might be one of those things where adversity might bring out the best in them. Hey, when you've been outscored 61-29 your first 2 games, doesn't really have much chance of getting a lot worse than that. So we'll see if things get worse for Pittsburgh or get better. I think it's going to get better. Dropping 9 spots to 23, outscored 50-41 in their first 2 games. They're 0-2. 347.5 yards per game overall, and they're going to Arizona, and it's Carolina. Now, Cam Newton apparently isn't on the field for practice, and there's some idea that maybe he won't play this week. So if Cam Newton doesn't play this week, that works out pretty well for Arizona. Not that Carolina's looked like Carolina. Not like Cam Newton's looked like Cam Newton either. Throws that he normally would make, for whatever reason, either the team's not allowing him to make those throws or he can't or something. But there's a lot of, I get the feeling, a lot of frustration. And of course, all people could talk about after that was what Cam Newton was wearing. He's got some strange fashion sense. You know, if a hockey player came out dressed like that, I can only imagine the amount of uproar that would cause. And in football, people go, he's kind of weird. He's kind of wacky. Kind of a wacky guy. Anyways, number 22, and moving up 5 spots from last week. They're going to Philadelphia. They've outscored their opponents 40-37. They're putting up 408 yards per game. So that's not bad. And maybe the Detroit Lions aren't as bad as expected. So again, I've moved them up 5 spots. They're technically undefeated. They've got a win and a tie. And we'll see if they can get things going. As I said, they're in Philadelphia this week. That's an excellent test of whether or not last week's win was just a one-off, or maybe if there's something sustainable going on with the Detroit Lions. Just don't laugh at that. That does happen. And with Stafford at quarterback, at least they have the quarterback. Number 21, moving up 10 spots from last week. I was really impressed with these guys this week. I was. And now they're going to be at home against the New York Giants. They're 1-1. They've been outscored 45-37. They're putting up 292 yards per game. But you know what? Tampa, this team, now with New Orleans and the Drew Brees injury, that makes the division wide open. And you never know, Tampa might end up getting in there. It might end up being Tampa's game here. Really, really bizarre. But again, that's what happens with football. You end up with at least one surprise a year. Maybe it's Tampa's turn. Number 20, moving up 2 spots from last week, and they're going to be at home against the Rams. They've been outscored 46-36 in their 2 games. They're putting up 360.5 yards per game, and that's the Browns. So the Browns weren't as bad this week as last week, obviously. They played pretty darn well last night against the Jets. So again, right? So you look at it and you go, well, they got beat by the Raiders, and then they beat the Jets. So what do we know? We know they can beat the Jets. That's what we know about the Browns right now. And now they're going to be playing at home against the Rams. That's your test. If they can keep things close against the Rams, if they can beat the Rams, then Cleveland fans can start getting optimistic again and start being happy because maybe this team will get to the playoffs. And they're the only team in that division that looks like they'll be able to even consider threatening Baltimore for first place. Both the Bengals and the Steelers both look through their first 2 games like it's not going to happen. Number 19, moving up 1 spot from last week despite a loss. They're headed to Minnesota. They've been outscored 44-34. They're putting up 332 yards per game, and it's the Raiders. The Raiders, of course, did defeat the Browns in week 1. That's why I left the Browns at 20, and I left the Raiders at 19. And again, even though we're early in the season, I think the records are important. And Oakland did handle Cleveland, did end up holding on and winning that game against Cleveland in week 1. So I'll go ahead and leave them at 19 for now. And if Oakland were to go to Minnesota and get a win this week, then they could start being talked about as a possible surprise this year as well. Number 18, moving up 5 spots from last week. They're going to be in Indianapolis this week. They've been outscored 48-36. They're putting up 356 yards per game right now. Atlanta. I was really impressed with Atlanta this week. And what's weird is that yesterday, Sid Sixero on Tim and Sid was talking a lot about Matt Ryan and how Matt Ryan doesn't look interested and he's not impressed with Matt Ryan. And I thought Matt Ryan was fine in my eyes. I didn't think he had a bad game, but okay. So yeah, Matt Ryan and the Falcons, you just never know. They didn't have a great season last year, but maybe things turn around. Again, there are some divisions that feel really wide open, which they should be 2 weeks into the season, and yet with the way football works, there are certain teams that are, up here, and then everybody else is kind of in the middle. And we'll see that when we get up to near the top of this power rankings board. Number 17, putting up 60 points and allowing 32. They are 1-1, and they're going to Jacksonville. They dropped 6 points on this board. They dropped from 11 last week to 17 this week, putting up 290.5 yards per game, and that's Tennessee. So the Titans take a bit of a drop this week, and now they're going to go to Jacksonville. If they win that, they'll end up getting a bump up a little bit next week. Tennessee, I'm still thinking, well, middle of the road. We'll see. We'll see where they end up. Again, they had a great week 1. Week 2, not as great. This is how things kind of work. If they end up being an 8-8 team, you probably need some help to make the playoffs. Number 16, also 1-1, moving up 2 spots from last week. They've been outscored 47-43, and they're putting up 332 yards per game so far, and that's the Colts. Maybe the rumors were right. Maybe Andrew Luck retiring wasn't as big a deal as it was made to be at the time. Maybe Indianapolis will be fine. 2 weeks into the season, 1-1. Could be worse. Could be better. Could be worse. And they're going to be playing at home against Atlanta. So that's going to be a pretty fun game. If I'm talking about which game this Sunday I'd be interested in watching, that would be definitely one that would be near the top of the list. I don't get access to all the games. I don't have the NFL Sunday ticket. In general, I watch all the hockey stuff when hockey season starts. So I kind of have to pace myself when it comes to the whole football thing, or else I'm all sportsed out. So yeah, Indy's in 16th. Number 15, moving up 4 spots from last week. They've outscored their opponents 72-34. They're putting up 414 yards per game, and they're versus Pittsburgh this week. They're at home against Pittsburgh. San Francisco should be 3-0 next week. San Francisco should keep moving up. I could have justified having a huge jump for San Francisco, but I thought, no, don't have a huge jump for them just yet. Biggest jumper of the week is Tampa Bay moving up 10 spots to 21. San Francisco moving up 5. That's fine, or four spots. 4 spots. We're not going to jump them past everybody just yet, but if they do what they should do this week, and that's beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're going to take another move up this board. Number 14, dropping 2 spots from last week. They're 1-1, and they are at home against Houston this coming week. They've outscored their opponents 40-37, and they're putting up 429.5 yards per game, and that's the LA Chargers, who, of course, my favorite team, and so they lose this week. And number 13, staying in the same spot as they were last week, 1-1. And they're at the Chargers, 42-41. They've been outscored, 338.5 yards per game. And there you go. So Houston and the Chargers, who play each other this week, and they're right next to each other on the power rankings. Houston is one of the few teams that stays in the same spot as last week. The way they earned that win, I mean, you stopped them, right? You stopped them from getting the 2-point conversion. But, again, why don't you kick it? Anyway, it's one of those things that just, we'll see if I have a WTF moment every week with the NFL or not. Probably will. Just one of those, why are you making that call? What are they doing? Number 12, moving up 5 spots from last week. They're 2-0. They've outscored their opposition 45-30. They're putting up 379 yards per game. And they're at home against Cincinnati, and that's the Bills. The Bills could go to 3-0. The trick is this. They could go to 3-0 without playing a team that has a good record. So Buffalo, and they did this a few years ago as well, and I remember Buffalo went, I want to say they went 4-0. I'm trying to think if it was 3-1 or 4-0. And they did this whole bit on one of the channels. I don't remember if it was CBS or NBC or Fox, where they had this whole thing, this shtick with the Buffalo Bills. Like, you guys are relevant. What's going on? Sort of like a joke, like, sitting with the players, like, did you expect to actually win games kind of thing? And then the team kind of fell apart after that. Because I remember thinking, watching that, it's early. Don't jinx them with something like this. So they put out this production about how good they were doing, and then everything fell apart. I've been jinxing teams for years with hockey. So watching somebody else do that with football, I felt that, why are you doing this kind of thing? So hopefully with Buffalo, it's not unsustainable. It would be nice to see Buffalo have a good season. Really would. Number 11, moving up 4 spots from last week. They're 1-1. They've been outscored 24-19, so they were only allowing 24 points in 2 games. They've only scored 19, however. 263.5 yards per game. That's not going to get it done. The good news is they're going to Washington, which means the Bears could put up a ton of yards this coming weekend. And if the Bears are going to make that jump, this is the weekend to do it. Again, you've got Washington. Go out there and get her done. Number 10, dropping 5 spots from last week. They're 1-1. They've been outscored 55-39. They're putting up 377 yards per game, but that could drop with Drew Brees out. And they're talking a lot about how their backup they'll be okay. Their backup's not bad. They'll be okay. They might survive. I have some doubts. But that's just me. That's why they drop like they do this week. They take the loss and they lose Drew Brees. It's really quite the double whammy. So can they win without Brees? We'll find out as soon as this weekend when they're at Seattle, which is a tough enough matchup as it is without taking Drew Brees out of the lineup. He's supposed to be out a minimum 6 weeks, so we'll see. Number 9, dropping 2 spots from last week. They're 1-1. They're outscored their opponents 44-33 so far. 345 yards on average so far this season, and they are going to be at home against Oakland, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings, bit of a setback this week in that game against Green Bay. I know that's a sensitive subject, so I'll move along. But, these things happen, and it's part of that whole Vikings history, sadly, is you see a game and you go, well, if only this had happened, what was that call about? That's part of being a fan of the Vikings, unfortunately. Number 8, dropping 2 spots from last week, also 1-1. They've outscored their opponents 52-51. They're putting up 361 yards per game, and it's the Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles this coming week, they are, of course, at home against Detroit. That's a sneaky tough game right now. Detroit, again, loose team, no expectations. Don't take them lightly, Eagles, or you could end up finding yourself at 1-2. I think the Eagles win the game. I'm not. People will notice I haven't done a prediction video yet when it comes to football because I stay away from it. But I stay away from it in hockey too. But the Eagles should win that game. They really should. That shouldn't be a game that they have to sweat it out about. But Detroit, been kind of a surprise so far in 2 weeks. We'll see whether or not they can continue that. Number 7, moving up 3 spots from last week. They're 2-0. They've outscored their opponents 31-19. They're putting up 274 yards per game, which is the lowest of any team in the top 10. But they're Green Bay. Green Bay's usually pretty solid defensively, and I say that usually because somebody's going to go, hey, the stats last year, the stats the year before. Green Bay, over their history, I consider them to be a pretty hard-nosed team. Playing at Lambeau Field will do that for you. They're at home against Denver. So really, Green Bay should be 3-0 next week, and we should be talking about the Pack as being, legit contenders. With Aaron Rodgers, he's going to will them to that, is my guess. And I would think that their yards per game should go up. I would be very surprised if they don't go up this week. Number 6, moving up 3 spots from last week, also 2-0, which every team is from here. All of these teams haven't lost yet. And going to Kansas City this week, that's going to be a massive, massive game. So the Baltimore Ravens, 2-0, and now they're going to Kansas City. That game's going to be an intense one. They're putting up 541.5 yards per game. That's ridiculous. Now, that includes a game against the Miami Dolphins, so you got to kind of asterisk that and go, okay, well, that's the Miami Dolphins, so they're down here with 192 yards a game. So, somebody's got to get the yards. Certainly not going to be Miami. And so for Baltimore, they get a nice jump this week. And if they can win the game in Kansas City, they'll definitely be top 5 next week, maybe even top 4. Number 5, moving up 3 spots from last week. They've outscored their opponents 49-46. Close games. They're 2-0, close games. Putting up 328.5 yards per game, and it is Seattle. Seattle at home against New Orleans also should be favored to go to 3-0. Again, without Drew Brees in there, Seattle should be able to defeat the New Orleans Saints. But this is where the but part comes in. Seattle's... I do wonder if they're going to have kind of a letdown against the New Orleans Saints. And even without Drew Brees, if maybe New Orleans can claw out a win in Seattle. It's going to be an interesting game. Being that I'm not too far from Seattle, I have no problem finding Seattle Seahawks games and coverage. That being said, I don't see them necessarily as a contender for the Super Bowl yet. But the spot where they are right now in the power rankings tells you don't take them lightly. Yeah, we'll see. Number 4, same spot as last week. They've outscored their opponent 66-38, putting up 484 yards per game. Dak Prescott starting to get the respect he deserves. Number 3, outscoring their opponents 68-36, and of course they're at home against Miami. So, yeah, we'll just move on. At home against Baltimore, it's the Chiefs. The Chiefs, which being third last week and third this week, should surprise no one. Second overall, outscoring their opponents 57-36, 2-0, 364 yards, 364.5 yards per game. Kansas City has 477.5. Dallas has 484. The Rams at number 2 and outscoring their opponents 76-3, 423 yards per game, and they're at home against the Jets this coming week. Does New Orleans play anybody, does New England play anybody this year, or is it just going to all be teams in this row? Starting to feel that way. Anyways, for the New England Patriots, they avoid, you could have called it a trap game, but you couldn't have said it with a straight face. It's not. So there you go. Your rankings from 32 through to 1. No change in the top 4. None. And again, I that top 4 is pretty solid in my eyes. We'll see if Baltimore can break into it. We'll see if Green Bay can threaten to get into it as well. And the Chicago Bears are a team that could fight their way up. And San Francisco, who are 2-0. If they can get that to, say, 4-0, 5-0, if they can start really rolling. It's going to be a very, very interesting season from here. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And using different numbers, I intend to do that every week with the NFL football rankings. And if people who watch my regular channel are wondering, hey, could he do that with hockey with the power rankings? I'm going to do all kinds of stuff with the hockey power rankings. So there you go. Your NFL power rankings as we head into week number 3. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. I will talk to you again soon.